what upsets me, and I think upsets a lot of people, is the way that they've completely introduced Paddy Mayne into turning him into something he was not. And he's barely watchable because there's no humor to him. I actually find he tires me out watching Paddy Mayne because he's angry, he's shouting the whole time, he's reciting poetry, and people wouldn't have put up with him. All the SAS veterans I interviewed, if they'd met someone like that, they would have willingly have been RTU just to get out of the grasp of this, well, sort of psychotic poetry obsessed weirdo, frankly.
Hello and welcome to the pod. This is a quick intro for all those interested in the new TV show for the second series of Rogue Heroes. I should mention there will be spoilers. Gavin Mortimer joins. He's a historian of the SAS in the Second World War and someone who's an expert on Paddy Mayne. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to me, talking with Gavin on Rogue Heroes Series 2. Gavin, welcome to the podcast. Great pleasure to have you on. Thank you.
Great to be back, Ollie. Happy New Year, everyone.
Yes, Happy New Year to all the listeners. I haven't done that yet. Gosh, that's rude of me. I think Larry David in Curb Your Enthusiasm says you can't say Happy New Year beyond the 7th of January. So we're a day over.
We're one day out. Apologies. Okay. At least I've taken down my Christmas decorations.
Good stuff. Well, this is coming out. We're recording on the 8th. It's going to come out on the 15th of January. And we're talking about Rogue Heroes Series 2. Gavin was on for Rogue Heroes Series 1. So if you've recently watched that, you should listen to Gavin's thoughts on Series 1. Gavin is the man to go to on the SAS during the Second World War, and his definitive biography of David Stirling. That will rile up a few in the know, I'm sure. The definitive biography of David Stirling, The Phony Major, is the book. And what's interesting is we were speaking recently, Gavin, about your latest book, which is the SAS in Italy, I think, in Sicily and Italy.
Sicily and Italy 43, yeah.
Which actually has done really well. There's loads and loads of people have been listening to that, which is pleasing. And so Rogue Heroes Series 2 actually begins roundabout where your book is. So if you want to know about that, you can have a look at Gavin's latest book. But let's talk about the Series 2 as a whole. Before we started recording, you were just saying that you've watched the first 3 episodes. I've watched 1. And you're speed watching it. But what are your sort of overall thoughts so far, Gavin?
Not good. The first series was more or less, I think I described it to the Daily Telegraph as 8 out of 10 for entertainment and 5, 6 for accuracy. In this one, I would say probably 5, 6 for entertainment and 1, 2, 1 probably for accuracy. I don't actually think the storyline, just from a purely entertainment point of view, I think it's episode 2, for example, is pretty slow. And the plot lines with the mafia, for example, with this treacherous priest, obviously fictitious. And I don't think that they enhance the narrative in any way, or the drama, the excitement. But in terms of historical accuracy, it's risible, really. It's I don't know where to start, really. I'm a bit overwhelmed by it. But just very, very little. I mean, for a good example that springs to mind is that the SAS, or Special Raiding Squadron, as they were known for the campaign in Sicily and Italy, were approximately 250 to 280 strong, split into 3 troops. In Rogue Heroes, it's Paddy Mayne and 35 men. I don't know why they've done that. And I think this is probably aside from the what I've described as the immoral depiction of Paddy Mayne. I think I just don't. The other thing that baffles me is why they've deviated so much from the actual truth, because the truth itself is an extraordinary story in how Paddy Mayne, after the capture of David Stirling in January 1943, and there's this period for several weeks where the future of the SAS was really up in the air. And it was a combination of Paddy Mayne, Bill Stirling, who I'm pleased to see. That's the one saving grace. I think he's well acted, the character. He's a good juxtaposition to Paddy Mayne, as exaggerated as Mayne is. But Stirling, Mayne, and George Jellicoe, who would go on to lead the SBS, the three of them really saved the SAS. It was, as I said, reorganized as the Special Raiding Squadron. But then in a very short space of time, so 3 months, Paddy Mayne transformed them from this guerrilla unit in the desert, depicted well in the first series of Rogue Heroes, the attacking airfields in jeeps or with the aid of a long-range desert group. Paddy Mayne in spring 43 transformed them into this commando assault force in a very short space of time. And he did that but through physical training, but also psychological training, really preparing them for this great change in warfare and tactically. And so that in itself is a astounding story and a resounding success, because after there was the Cape Muro de Porco, which we see in the first episode, and then Augusta, which we don't get any sense of at all, and then the landing at Banyara in the tow of the Italian boot in September 43, and then Termoli in October 43, which again is very distorted in the second series of Rogue Heroes. And they got huge praise from General Miles Dempsey of 13 Corps for their actions throughout this summer of early autumn of 43 for these series of operations, when they had played a pivotal part in facilitating the Allied invasion of Sicily and then Italy. So, but you don't get any sense of that in the second series of Rogue Heroes, and it just leaves me disappointed that this was a great opportunity. It's, I can see, people say, oh yeah, but it's entertainment. Yeah, it is entertainment, but why ignore the actual facts? Because they are, in a way, as entertaining or certainly as remarkable as what we see on the second series of Rogue Heroes.
Yeah, I think the historical accuracy, I mean, they're very clear right at the start.
Yeah.
To say, they
I
pretty
think
much say
that's
it's
worth
made
saying.
up.
They do make clear that exactly, which is why I'm not bothered by that. I understand that, but what upsets me, and I think upsets a lot of people, is the way that they've completely introduced Paddy Mayne into turning him into something he was not. And he's barely watchable because there's no humor to him. I actually find he tires me out watching Paddy Mayne, because he's angry, he's shouting the whole time, he's reciting poetry, and people wouldn't have put up with him. All the SAS veterans I interviewed, if they'd met someone like that, they would have willingly have been RTU just to get out of the grasp of this, sort of psychotic, poetry obsessed weirdo, frankly. And so yeah, that's the and looking at social media, there's a lot of very upset people, and I actually did a tweet about this yesterday, so January the 7th, comparing it to William Murdoch, who was the first officer on the Titanic. And when the James Cameron film came out in 1997, it had Murdoch taking bribes from rich passengers, to allow them on the lifeboats, and then actually shooting a couple of passengers who tried to jump into a lifeboat. That didn't happen. and his family, his 8-year-old nephew, was most upset, understandably. And to his credit, the I think it was the vice president of 20th Century Fox went to Dalbeattie in Scotland, where Murdoch's nephew lived, to offer a personal apology, and he also made a £5,000 donation to the local Dalbeattie High School and their William Murdoch Memorial Fund. They had a memorial prize. They had a prize, obviously, because he was someone to look up to. He wasn't someone who went around shooting people. And I think that's perhaps something for the BBC to ponder. I know that Blair Mayne's family have, after the first series, when he actually, compared to the second series, he's reasonably sane, expressed their distaste for his portrayal. I just think it's immoral to go around completely changing someone's character, particularly, all right, if it's 500 years ago, fair enough, because there's going to be no living relatives who but Paddy Mayne has got relatives still alive, and I think more consideration should have been taken into account of their feelings.
It's a very odd decision to make because, as you say, in the first series, there is a certain sensitivity you get with the character of Mayne, and he has close personal relationships, and all that seems. I mean, okay, I've only seen episode 1, but all that seems discarded, and he just seems like a complete. I don't know. See you next Tuesday. I wouldn't want to deal with him at all.
No, I mean
And
he's a thug. He's a thoroughly.
yeah,
There's no redeeming features to him, as you said. That's a good point you make, Ollie. In the first series, there was a sensitivity to him, someone who was conflicted, who had these occasional outbursts. But in the second series, he's just a brute. He goes around firing off his revolver in a church in the second episode. And of course, there's the moment in the first episode where he threatens to shoot that airborne soldier who's, as they head towards Sicily, who's clutching to the assault craft, and which obviously never happened. But it just makes him into a cold-blooded killer. And I think that's, again, having talked to so many men who interviewed Mayne, and you get what's so fascinating about him is this paradox that actually out of action, he was very languid and very softly spoken, very calm. And he was a trained solicitor. He'd studied law at Queen's. He was an intellectual who enjoyed reading poetry, reading novels. And yet in action, he just transformed into this dynamic, clinical warrior, really. Just probably in my view, the Britain, certainly the Second World War, Britain's most effective guerrilla fighter. And this is never really explored. They try in season 1 to they flirt with this, but in season 2 they just give up, and he's just a psycho, frankly. And it's not only disappointing, but it's actually boring. I think people will struggle after when they see him in season 3. In episode 3 of season 2, just still shouting, and there's no humor to him. There's no warmth to him, and it's just tiresome.
yeah, no charisma as well. I
No,
mean,
exactly. Yeah, absolutely no charisma. Yeah, but again, Ollie, good point, because you look at him as portrayed in the second series, and you think, why would anyone want to follow a man who's clearly unstable? Whereas the real Paddy Mayne inspired great devotion. Now, that's not to say he didn't have his critics, people who criticize some of his character flaws. He could be pedantic, he was capricious, he could be quite grumpy. Yeah, he was a commanding officer, so he was under a lot of pressure. But at the same time, in combat, all of them said they just felt so reassured in his presence because they trusted him to make the right decision. And you look at Paddy Mayne in this Rogue Heroes, frankly, you wouldn't trust him to make any sort of rational decision, what in or out of combat.
Yes, I suppose that it comes very early on. He's sitting angrily in a bar in Cairo, and upset over the being refused leave for the death of his father. Is that they get that right? Do they?
No, he was his father did die, but he didn't there was a rumor, or in one book it was suggested that he went after Richard Dimbleby, the war correspondent, to take out his anger on him, but that in around this time, but that never happened because he was in England at the time, and these stories of him beating up eight red caps are apocryphal. The one incident that I have found is mentioned in the unpublished memoirs of Brigadier George Davey, who was the director of military operations in Cairo in 42, 43. And shortly after they'd finished their training in Palestine and then Egypt, and were preparing to ship out to Sicily, so we're talking late June, they had a couple of days leave in Cairo, and Paddy Mayne ended up being arrested for an incident with the provost marshal, a man, Lieutenant Colonel Dunn, nicknamed Punch. So that gives you an idea that he may have been quite a fiery character himself. Anyway, George Davies says in his memoirs that he had to speak to pull a few strings to get Mayne released the next day, and Mayne, which happened, and Mayne came into his office to sheepishly apologise for any embarrassment, and Davey said they had a good laugh about it, and that was the end of that. So again, that's an indication that there was this side to Mayne. But let's be clear, he did have a fiery side to him, but not a psychotic side. And again, what we said, it's just a missed opportunity to explore that in greater detail.
Yeah, they could have shown a bit of, at least a bit of charm in all of that. Hello, Ollie here. Please forgive my interruption, but I wanted to let you know that at Aspects of History, we produce a digital magazine featuring articles, interviews, short stories, and book reviews of the best historical writing available. Authors featured including Ben Macintyre, Lucy Worsley, Andrew Roberts, and plenty more. An annual subscription is available for only $9.99. That's pounds or dollars. Yep, you heard that right. That's 6 issues for under £10 or dollars. Head over to aspectsofhistory.com to subscribe, where you can also gift subscriptions. Now back to the show. So, okay, you've mentioned Bill Stirling, and it's great that he gets included, because actually until your book appeared, and I'm obviously not an expert in these matters, but having read your book, The Phony Major, and your latest, is really interesting to read about Bill Stirling's role. It is true that the SAS was unpopular, wasn't it? I mean, and Monty wasn't wildly keen on keeping them on. Is that correct?
Well, Monty wasn't wildly keen on David Stirling, who he found very impertinent, which of course he was. And he appreciated the SAS, though he appreciated more Monty, the Long Range Desert Group, who, of course, in early 43 pioneered the route into Tunisia that the Eighth Army used in their left hook on the Amarth line. So he knew the value of special forces, but as you say, there was an element within staff, what David Stirling, he had a good turn of phrase, David Stirling, referred to as fossilized shits, who didn't understand the role that special forces could use. Bill Stirling, as I write in The Phony Major, was very much, I mean, the joke in those early days in Cairo, the early days of the SAS, so we're talking summer, autumn, early 41, early 42, was that SAS stood for Stirling and Stirling, because it is very much a joint effort. And much of the intellectual input came from Bill, who had joined SOE at the start of the war, and in April 1940 had gone on Operation Knife, a 6-man sabotage operation to Norway. Their submarine had hit a mine en route, so the mission was aborted. He took them back to Bill Stirling, by the way, was the eldest of the 6 children, so the laird of Keir, and a minor aristocrat, but a very wealthy man. Took them back to his place just near Bridge of Allen in central Scotland, and really the 6 of them chewed the fat about. They knew that they'd been woefully underprepared for this guerrilla operation, and that really Britain didn't have the first idea about they didn't understand the potential. So Bill and a chap called Brian Mayfield, who was a senior officer in the Scots Guards, who was one of the 6 on the mission, went down to the War Office, pitched them this idea for a guerrilla warfare school, which was authorized. Luckily, it coincided with the Churchill replacing Chamberlain. Churchill was a huge fan of special forces, of commandos, and so a special training centre in Loch Islet in the northwest of Scotland opened in June 1940, and through those doors, trained by Bill Stirling and a great team of specialist instructors he assembled, went hundreds of commandos, some of the great figures of British Special Forces during the Second World War. Off the top of my head, Mike Calvert, Freddie Spencer Chapman, Tommy McPherson, George Jellicoe, and then he went out to Cairo with the SOE in 1941, early 41. Anyway, to cut a long story short, he and David came up with the idea for the Special Air Service. So he was very much David. I think he did see himself taking on the mantle after the capture of David, and felt a responsibility. As the series shows, the Rogue Heroes, he didn't have the flamboyance or the certainly the excitability of David. He was more measured. He had a far greater power of command, and he also understood that you couldn't just rub everyone up the wrong way. You had to be more diplomatic, if you like. But nonetheless, he came up against, for example, in Operation Chestnut, which was the first major 2 SAS operation in 1943, was a parachute drop into Sicily. Bill had wanted it large scale, so we're talking of a 3 dozen or so small parachute teams, 2 or 3 men, to drop behind enemy lines, sabotage, and also gather intelligence. But it was much smaller scale, and he could never get the Army HQ to understand that the more men you inserted, the greater the return would be, and yet nonetheless. So he was instrumental, Bill, in I suppose, as I said, with Paddy Mayne, because 2 SAS, their operations were whereas Paddy Mayne led 1 SAS into Sicily and Italy in commando type operations. When 2 SAS came into being in May 43, they operated, as we know, sort of the SAS today, so in small teams of between 3 and 6, dropping into deep into enemy territory by parachute. Because it's worth remembering, Ollie, that after the first disastrous SAS operation in November 1941, when they inserted by parachute into Libya, and of the 55 men who dropped, 34 were killed or wounded. That was the last time under David Stirling that the SAS undertook a parachute operation. But Bill was very keen to reintroduce this method of insertion, which they did to great success in Sicily, and then later in Italy in September, October, November 1943. So Bill was very important, and yeah, that is a good aspect of, just as in the first series of Rogue Heroes, we saw the French contribution, which was hitherto largely unacknowledged, but very important. Similarly, in season 2, it's good that he's included Bill Stirling.
And name change then? What's going on there?
What from to the
From
SR to
SAS to SRS.
well, what happened was they because Bill Stirling was asked to take command of one SAS in February 1940. He was sent um, by Bob Laycock, who was head of combined operations. He was sent to Cabrit, 80 miles east of Cairo, where the SAS were based, to really make an assessment of a situation following Stirling's capture. So Bill Stirling did this, talked to Mayne, to Jellicoe, to others, and he knew Jellicoe very well socially, in particular, but also militarily. Jellicoe had been back in London for conferences in November, December 42. And they wanted Bill, or they suggested to Bill that he assume command, but he didn't think he was the right person. And there were also other groups. So there was the SAS, SBS, the SAS, the Greek raiding squadron, and then there was a signals unit too. And they are all sort of knocking about at the end of as the African campaign wound down. So obviously by February, March 43, the Germans are being pushed back right into Tunisia. So they're looking ahead to the next phase. So Bill
And just to interrupt you there, Gavin, sorry to interrupt you, but in the show, they kind of, I did quite laugh at the beginning where they were saying, yeah, well, Montgomery advances at El Alamein and the Germans retreat, implying, there wasn't really much going on there. And it was quite a major tank battle, wasn't there?
Yeah, I mean that's right. It was a big what 7 months from after between El Alamein in October 42 to the end in May 43, and a lot of heavy fighting. And of course Paddy Mayne had been very important in that he with his squadron, A squadron, had spent October and November attacking the Germans as they retreated west through Libya towards Tunisia. And so,
Sorry, yeah, I
so
interrupted you. Yeah.
back to yeah back. So what happened was anyway the upshot was that a chap called Lieutenant Colonel Harry Cater, MC, a First World War veteran, was put in charge of the special raiding forces, or raiding forces HQ, and that was an umbrella group for the SAS, the SBS, the Greek squadron, and the other disparate special forces that had emerged, Popsky's private army, for example. But he was very much chairman of the board. So his job was to deal with the administrative side. Paddy Mayne was in command of one SAS. Now, what happened was that they decided one SAS had come into being in September 1942 when L Detachment, which was the initial SAS unit set up by Stirling and Stirling, expanded, was granted regimental status. So it expanded quite quickly to around about 500 officers and men. A, B, C, and D squadron. C squadron was composed of Frenchmen, and D squadron of relatively new, predominantly guardsmen. And it was decided that to send the Frenchmen back to the UK to train for operations in Europe, specifically France, of course. And D squadron, one SAS, became the SBS. So you were left with just A and B squadrons, and it was decided that just to form that into merge A and B squadrons to form a special raiding squadron purely for 1943. And then when the SAS, when these got confusing, when
Yeah.
Paddy Mayne's SRS returned to the UK at the beginning of 44, they once more reverted to one SAS, went on a big recruitment drive to swell their ranks to approximately 550. And so yeah, so that's and then Bill Stirling formed two SAS. Bill Stirling again. I mean, it's a fascinating time in the evolution of British Special Forces. Fascinating, a little bit confusing. Bill Stirling, in October 1942, had taken command of a small-scale raiding force, which was a commando unit operating in the Channel, also known as Number 62 Commando. He had come out. It had been intended to use that commando in Western Mediterranean, operating under the command of Eisenhower, who was a huge fan of British Special Forces, while one SAS would operate in the Eastern Mediterranean. But then David Stirling, very irresponsibly, and it was very irresponsibly because he'd been told not to go on operations himself, got himself captured in January 43 in Tunisia. And so Bill then expanded Number 62 Commando, which around about this time, March 1943, only comprised approximately 60 men. He expanded that to become Number 2 SAS in May 1943. So you had two. So in fact, in 1943, 2 SAS was bigger than Paddy Mayne's SRS. Bill Stirling, just for last a word on Bill Stirling, Ollie, he went back to again. He never went on operations with the SAS because that wasn't his job, and of course he was mindful of what had happened to David and knew that he wasn't going to get himself captured. So he was very much a planner. Roy Farron, who is to 2 SAS what Paddy Mayne is to 1 SAS, called him a great military strategist, someone who understood better than anyone the concept of SAS. And Bill was instrumental in November 1943 when he returned to the UK in arguing for the expansion of the SAS into a brigade, which happened in beginning of 1944. So you had 1 and 2 SAS, and then you had 3 and 4 French SAS, and you had a company of the Belgians. So approximately in total 2,500 men in this SAS brigade. So that was very much due to the influence of Bill Stirling, who, as someone who did, he'd been groomed to command from a young age. The Stirling's dad died when Bill was 21 or 20, I think, and he became laird with a huge staff under him, and a lot of business interests. So he had the tact that David lacked.
Okay, so we're probably, I think we've covered the facts behind it for listeners. If you are, okay, we're not recommending Rogue Heroes Series 2. Series 1 better, but if you could recommend something to watch on the Second World War involving special forces, not necessarily SAS, is there a film or a TV show that you would recommend?
Well, if Easy Company are of come under special forces, I'd certainly recommend Band of Brothers, which sticks faithfully to the book and is very, I mean, I think great television, and it's gritty, it's very authentic, and it does delve into you feel much more of a strain of combat. You don't. That's another of my criticism of Rogue Heroes. You don't. It's all a bit of a laugh, isn't it? It's you don't really feel the pressure that they are under, and
In the first episode, Gavin, they assault these gun positions, which don't seem that harmful to the invasion force behind, waiting for the flare. But also, they seem to sort of fire off one mortar, and that seems to be their kind of artillery cover for the
yeah. I
one
mean, whether
mortar.
they sorry.
The one mortar seems a little bit not. I wouldn't want to attack a position like that with simply one mortar having been fired.
No, well, they had the mortar section under the command of Lieutenant Alex Muirhead, was outstanding. Actually, after Cape Muro de Porco, Paddy Mayne gave him a choice. He could either have a medal or a promotion. And so Alex Muirhead said, "I'll go for the promotion, sir, because my widow could do with the extra pay." So he got his promotion. And but his mortar section, which had only again, that was Paddy Mayne's idea, and that I think arrived in about April 1943. And he wasn't a trained mortar; he learned on the job, Alex Muirhead, with his men, but they were really efficient. And I remember talking to, I think it was Bob Lowson, who was on the Cape Muro de Porco op, who said that before that op, I didn't have much hope or respect for Muirhead, but they put one of their first bombs landed right on the ammunition dump of the battery, and we went in after that. But they kept raining down bombs on both. Because another thing you don't see in that Muro de Porco op, Wally, is that in fact the first battery, which consisted of 4 large guns, and I recommend to anyone that to visit Cape Muro de Porco because it's little changed from 1943. You see the foundations of the 4 guns. You can easily see where the SRS came ashore and from where they attacked. The bunkers are still there. You go down into these bunkers, and you can see the bullet holes from where the SAS fired down and threw grenades down to clear them. So it's very evocative and quite moving, in fact. But after that, their reconnaissance was fairly limited, and they'd assumed that there was only 1 gun battery. But as they sat in the sun watching the main invasion fleet approach, suddenly from overhead, further inland, came a big shell that landed in the water. And so Mayne, and again, this is where you see the brilliance of Mayne as a commander, quickly assembled his men, examined the map, and from the direction from where the shell had come, and said, right, and issued orders for the 3 troops to attack. And they had to cross. It was about a couple of miles away. They had to cross quite open, exposed ground where they came under sniper fire, but they took their second battery out, eliminated that, and that was the last of the resistance from the gun batteries. So yeah, I mean, so none of that
It's
stuff.
showing that they've been brilliant.
Yeah, I know. It's whether they struggled with the budget and they couldn't
Yeah,
afford. I don't know. Perhaps they could only afford 1 mortar. But
it's the
anyway, it's
BBC. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
We've got to
So
fund an HR department, Gavin.
yeah. So it's just disappointing, really, and it's going back to what I was saying about the story of William Murdoch, the first officer on the Titanic. His nephew accepted the apology of the vice president of 20th Century Fox, but said nonetheless, what bothers me is in the years to come, um, people will only remember the William Murdoch in the film. They won't remember the real man who died saving lives. And I think that's going to be true of Paddy Mayne. Of course, read my book, read other book. Hamish Ross has written a very good biography. Um, but nonetheless, for the majority of the people, how many people, I mean, this depresses me. How many people watch Rogue Heroes and how many people read books? Well, 100, 1,000 times more. So the image that will be seared in people's mind now of Paddy Mayne is this short, angry Irishman shouting the whole time, and not the extraordinarily complex and intelligent and unorthodox man who was the heart of the wartime SAS.
Yeah, and a 6'3" lock forward for the Lions and the Ireland rugby team.
Heavyweight boxer, yeah, very good
Right,
cricketer too, apparently.
right. Oh, it's a very sad state of affairs, but I'm sure if listeners do want to know the truth, then I'll put links in to Gavin's book, and then I'm sure they will follow those links, and then they can come away feeling superior to all the TV audience who've not done that. But Gavin, it's been brilliant. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Ollie.
Thanks for listening. If you want to get in touch, you can email history@aspectsofhistory.com or use Spotify or Apple. But until then, thank you and good night.